Start the recording. And welcome everybody to our spring 2023 TWed Lightning Talks. Just a few rules of the road, no notes, no slides, approximately 2 minutes, although we'll go easy if you're a little bit long. This is being recorded and we'll share it through the talk page on the Tetherless website. No questions for the people, but when somebody finishes up, congratulate them with the same sort of gusto that you would like people to congratulate you when you finish when your message. And with that, let's kick it off with Sola. Yeah, we can welcome people too.
All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is a project that I'm kind of starting on, so I don't really have too many details about it yet. But the main idea of this project is trying to see if we can make use of foundation models to more effectively process the contents of and gain insights from data lakes. So essentially, data lakes refer to large collections of data that are just stored in various heterogeneous ways. So you might have a bunch of structured or semi-structured tables, or you could also include things like raw documents or web pages and those sorts of things that you might want to use as some sort of data source. And so there's a lot of challenges related to using these data lakes. And among them are trying to do some sort of matching of various different tables from different sources so that you can combine the content and gain some sort of insight from that. And also just trying to do this sort of processing over large scale data. If you're not specialized in how to actually deal with that sort of processing, it can be very challenging. And so by making use of these foundation models, which have been gaining a lot of attention recently, maybe we can leverage their linguistic capabilities to do things like perform matching across various structured or semi-structured table data from heterogeneous sources, and also maybe even serve as some sort of natural language interface in order to just use natural language to describe what sort of information you want to extract from the data lake, and then try to generate something in order to do that process automatically. There's been a lot of recent work on trying to do things like extracting attributes from documents automatically, as well as producing code to extract things from documents using these sorts of language models. And so we want to build upon that sort of recent related work in order to try to effectively just make better use of all of this heterogeneous data that we have. That's all I have to share. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Neha, and I'm going to be talking about my current research. So there exists a lot of behaviors that fall under the umbrella of health that people should be doing regularly, like regular physical activity and nutrition and all of these things. And there have been a lot of behavior change interventions to change people's existing behavior into these healthier behaviors. But generally what happens is when the intervention stops, people go back to their previous behavior. So what I wanted to look at is how to stop this effect of the past behavior. And one framework that looks at past behavior is habit formation, which states that habitual behavior are actions that are tied to cues in the environment. And the habit discontinuity hypothesis says that if you disrupt this cue, then you disrupt the whole behavior itself. And so we actually did see this in a qualitative study during the COVID-19 pandemic when we talked to type 2 diabetics self-managing their diabetes. We saw that the appearance of the pandemic disrupted a lot of their behaviors, like going out to eat at restaurants. And so in positive senses, but it also did disrupt behaviors in negative senses, like people stopped going to the gym and then, didn't exercise. And another problem is that we can't affect a disruption on the scale of the pandemic, and changing cues in general can be time consuming or costly or just simply not possible. So what I'm going to argue is that you can just perception of a cue. You don't have to actually change the cue itself. And I'm aiming to do this through the use of uncertainty. So the experiment that I ran last semester, I had participants come in to use a sitting desk or a standing desk. And I aimed to introduce uncertainty about the chair used in the sitting desk to get people to use in the standing desk. What the experiment saw was that people, yes, repeated their past behavior. We didn't see any effect of the condition itself. And in a pilot follow-up I saw that putting actual caution signs on the chairs themselves did get people to switch their behavior. And so I'm aiming to replicate that with a larger study. And also the interesting thing is in a difference from the existing habit discontinuity literature is that these students did not have any stated intention to change their behavior at all. And hopefully this work can provide a way of sort of stopping the effects of past behavior when it comes to future interventions for healthy behaviors.
Hi, my name is Jade, and for the past year and a half or so, I've been working on building an ontology for fairness in machine learning. And I won't get into the details of fairness in machine learning, but just suffice to say, in this field, people have very many different definitions about how exactly do you make machine learning models fair, what constitutes like a certain definition of fairness that you want in one situation, it might be completely different in another one, and there might be different ways to measure it and so on. And so we took a look at this field and we decided it would be really helpful if we could catalog everything and decide on like a nice consistent set of definitions and so on for everyone to work off of. The issue is most of the machine learning fairness researchers I talked to are like, cool, what's an ontology? So we wanted to find a way to make this accessible. And we looked into doing something like, okay, you can just post the ontology online, obviously, and people can look at it and see these classes. But how do we actually let people with very little ontology experience actually use it and take full advantage of reasoning with the ontology? And so what I've been working on most recently is developing an interface where the online web interface is populated by information that we've encoded in tags on the ontology. So for given different use cases, I've identified like, okay, we want to be able to look at Sparkle queries, or we want to be able to generate Sparkle queries that connect together these different sets of classes. And so we'll tag that in the ontology and we'll give it a name and we'll say that we want to be able to sort by this. And then we want to look at this other case and sort by this. And so the idea is you'll be able to automatically populate an interface that lets you sort and browse stuff as if you're doing reasoning, but all of the reasoning is kind of under the hood. So it's all abstracted away. So the end user doesn't have to have any knowledge of how to write Sparkle queries themselves or DL code. And then the other benefit would be as you adjust and change the ontology, you can just change what kind of tags you're giving it in its metadata, and that'll change how it gets populated with the interface. So with the end goal that we could then bring this to users as a way for them to, given their specific situation, their specific use case, they're able to find out what kinds of fairness definitions and what kind of metrics and mitigation methods and so on actually will work for them. Thanks.
We need to talk about the export function on that.
Well, sure.
Hi, everybody. My name's Kelsey, and for the past semester, I've been working on what is currently called the Semantic Instrument Repository, or SIR, which aims to model specifically psychometric questionnaires. So questionnaires are one of the primary methods of assessing psychiatric conditions and disorders, so they're, of course, very important, but the current method of sharing questionnaires currently is usually in a text-only format, which makes it difficult to, for example, immediately compare different measures or different versions of the same assessment. So to kind of provide a solution to this, SIR aims to model questionnaires as well as specifically the symptoms and disorders that they assess, which allows these questionnaires to be represented as knowledge graphs. So ultimately, this will make it a lot easier for the people administering these questionnaires to find the specific measures they need and make more intelligent decisions about what they would like to administer, and additionally reuse these measures and scales in the future. Yeah, thank you all.
It's not online. Let's skip ahead to Sabine.
Sure.
Doctors.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sabir Rashid. And today I'll be talking about my startup, Tetherless TCG. So if you guys want to look it up, you can go on Instagram.com/TetherverseTCG. The website tetherversetcg.com is currently locked because we're fulfilling orders, but we're also on Patreon, patreon.com/TetherverseTCG. So pretty much my brother and I started a video game company, and the first game we're releasing is a trading card game. So it's actually a trading card board game where you have like a grid, like a chess-like board where you play cards onto the board. So there's different types of cards. There's anima cards, which are like Pokemon essentially, tamers, which are the trainer of the anima. Then you have structures like castles or towers. You have landscapes, and then you have like mana cards, which you use to, you tap the cards in order to play structures or landscapes or anima or tamers or things onto the board. So pretty much all of these different concepts are encoded as ontologies. So we have a structure ontology, anima ontology, tamer ontology, a general ontology. We have the card ontology, element ontology for the mana. So all the information is in ontologies. And then for specific things, we have knowledge graphs. So for specific anima, for specific tamers, we have knowledge graph entries. For each of the cards, they're also encoded as knowledge graphs. So what does this allow us to do? So we use inference to infer attributes that are kind of redundant, so we don't have to encode them all the time. So for example, every pyro card will have a pyro element, and we can infer that just because the card is a pyro card. And what we actually do is we query the triple store to compile the card data, and then we automatically generate the cards using Photoshop scripting. So if any of the data in the card changes, or if the design of the card changes, then we don't have to actually manually update the Photoshop file. We just update the data and the scripting automatically updates the file. So yeah, we're just getting started. We raised almost $4,000 in pre-orders last month, and our Patreon that ends in 5 days, you guys can join. We're already expecting over $2,000 a month from Patreon, which considering we just went public, well, we're not even public. We're in the pre-public. Considering we haven't done a Kickstarter or anything, this is pretty good indication that there's some interest in our product. So we're excited to see where this goes next.
Cool. BJ's been clapping on like, BJ, give me a second. I'm going to move you over so people can see you here. And unfortunately, I've got, John's got. That's kind of a good idea. And also balancing. All right, we can see you now. Go ahead.
Thanks for accommodating me, John. I'm kind of feeling sick, so I didn't want to come in person. So for the last year and a half, I've been working on several projects in the field of transfer learning. So with transfer learning, you can essentially like use the knowledge of one task to learn something else, or like make it easier to learn something else. So for instance, like if you know how to add and subtract, you would be doing better on multiplication and division and stuff like that. So, and machine learning, there are like several methods for transfer learning, and it's pretty much used on a day-to-day basis. Even with large language models, like fine tuning is a technique that people use to train these models for specific tasks after they're done for general training. So with transfer learning, there are several problems, and one of them is making sure that the model is robust, and the other one is making sure that the model is explainable. So my projects are in this area of trying to make the models better and trying to make them explainable. So for instance, we are working on a few projects to explain what knowledge is transferred from one model to another model, and what sort of explanations can be drawn in this. Like there are several examples. Like one could be visual explanations to see what cues are transferred from one vision model to another model, or it could be concept level explanations where you can learn about what concepts are transferred from one model to another model. So these are semantic concepts that I'm talking about, and there are other several ways. And Finally, we are also more recently looking into making the transfer learning methods themselves more better. So one of the avenues that we are looking into is we as humans also do transfer learning in a multimodal setting, right? Like, so for example, if I say, don't think about a pink elephant, you all made up an image of pink elephant in your brain. So you're like, even though the cue was auditory, you made this image in a visual sense. So we're looking into cross-modal transfer, where you can transfer knowledge from across domains and make each task learn better from using this additional knowledge. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have for today. Thanks.
Go ahead.
So everybody,
Go next.
I'm Matt Johnson. I'm going to talk about a problem I've been looking at for a little bit now. So it's kind of been highlighted by some of our other guests. Knowledge graphs are important technology. They can allow us to run analytics, generate really cool visualizations, and even power card games now, which is exciting. One of the difficulties, though, with them is either augmenting them or first creating them. And this is because data can live in a lot of different spots, but one of the ones that's commonly found is in tables. Tables are challenging because they use locality to encode the context of their data kind of implicitly. And a lot of time that context is not necessarily transferred with it. A lot of the current techniques that are used in this sort of processing to augment a knowledge graph using tables relies on data level alignments, where we look at entities within tables and within the knowledge graph, find an overlap, and use that on a voting strategy to determine upper level classes and relationships between them. This process is shown in SemTab, which is a yearly competition at ISWIC. Works really well when we have very simple tables with a single main subject with everything being a property off of it, and when we have lots of named entities. My work has been looking at when we don't have nice simple tables, when they're more complex, when we have multiple subjects, and when we have real data that might not have any named entities in it. In this case, we need something more. One way that authors, data publishers come over this context gap is they publish a data dictionary, which takes the schema elements and talks about what they are and how they relate to each other. I've been looking at training transformer networks to parse these descriptions and use them to discover the upper level ontologies, and use that to discover the implicit and explicit entities within the data. And that's kind of been the thrust of my work, and I think that's all I got for now, but thank you.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Inwan, and I want to talk about what I've been doing this past year. Well, there were a bunch of side projects, but the overarching theme is called blockchain interoperability. So when you hear blockchain, you might think of it as an unwise or wise investment, depending on when you bought it. But there's a lot more to blockchain than just the money aspect. So in the generation of Bitcoin, the idea was that it maintains a shared ledger where every machine, they're not allowed to lie, and really the data that's being written to that ledger will be the amount of monies that people have. But with the introduction of Ethereum, now these databases are programmable and they still maintain the guarantee aspect. And Another interesting aspect of blockchain that's rising is the usage of it as a database itself. Because of its nice guarantees, people are able to use it as actually a replacement for a server while making sure that nothing is faulty. It will not work if it's faulty. That's like the premise of blockchain. And what we want to do in our project here is to facilitate different blockchain networks, because now we're seeing enterprise blockchain networks which aren't public. Not everyone can join, and they're maintained by a certain select members. And these networks, by their, I guess, fundamentals, are not able to talk to each other. And so there needs to be a trustworthy way first to establish communication. And on top of that, there might be cases where we want to have some sort of privacy. So like a wheat supplier wants to send wheat to the buyer, and they want to let him know I sent it, but they don't want to tell him when I sent it, where I sent it from, whose ship it's riding on, all that stuff. So there needs to be some sort of a way to guarantee the level of privacy that we can have in these communications. So what we've been doing is we've been looking a lot into this, I guess, there's a lot of stuff in there, but it's called Hyperledger Labs. So this is backed by the Linux Foundation, which is why we think it has a bright future, hopefully. And we've been looking into basically these enterprise grade level, grade DLT, so distributed ledger technology networks, and using their software called Hyperledger Cacti. So this is a tool that allows the blockchains to talk to each other. That's nice, but it doesn't have any of the nice privacy stuff I just mentioned. And also the identity resolution is something we're looking into. That's also the same thing as privacy, because you know there's an entity on this blockchain, you know there's another one on the other blockchain, but how do you know they're the same thing or not? So there needs to be some sort of a resolution happening there, and that is also something that we're looking into. So basically, we've been working with these Hyperledger tools to try to build on top of it and implement our new private ideas here. That's the main project. So thank you.
And I want to put in a word for the pies. Don't forget about the wonderful pies back there. Thank you to Kathy.
Yeah, in fact, half of you can't be paid next year because.
But there's a very happy chorus.
Come sing for us.
Hello, everybody. Apologies for coming late. I thought I was not going to make it. So hello, everybody. I'm Shweta. I work basically in the fields of combining data science and prebiotic chemistry, and I'm going to tell you more about what I do today. The problem we found with what we down here in Winslow know as dark data or legacy data, which is stuck in a lot of old leather-bound journals and publications, have suddenly become very prominent or relevant to origins of life research that is happening on campus or in the scientific community as a whole. And so what has happened now is that these experimental data sit in old journals, papers, or books that are not even digitized. So what has happened is that there is a need to actually extract this data so we can consider what experiments can be run or what parameter spaces need to be explored. And to help the domain scientists out, we tried certain basic things we could throw their way, which was giving them an Excel data sheet or giving them a template to fill out all the data they have and see if we could just use them in CSV formats in just processing the way we do in a general data science lifecycle. And what we realized was that it's such a huge field within the field of astrobiology that one template didn't fit all the necessities that they have, or one template was not enough to accommodate all the parameters they had for their different experiments, because the life cell, as they consider it, and in science, does not have just one component where it could be just finance or it could be just healthcare. There's too many intersecting domains within that domain. And that led us to realizing that it needs to be a constrained format for the domain scientists to input all this data so we can further use it in the way we use it for data science, machine learning, and analysis. Because one component which they are trying to address in this research project is that what can they leverage through the computational technologies we have here at Tetherless into a completely scientific field that has been so purely oriented in lab research, where they have not actually implemented any analytical tools or any of the algorithms that we have. So currently where we stand at is that we now have a framework built for these domain scientists where they're expected to go in and fill this data. One, in the first part, to attempt to rescue all the dark data that we have so that we don't lose it in the in the process of digitization. And at the same time, it's also useful for all the experiments that will be carried moving forward to have like one legacy repository where we can have all this data coming in from what they call the prebiotic chemistry, where they're trying to study what led to the formation of the first cell. And then after we get this data, where it goes is it's split into 3 to 4 different formats. The one which we love doing are the usual visualizations and the dashboards, which we are good at, and then throwing them up on the fireplace to see how parameters interact with each other. Another way it goes is a field called geochemical modeling, where they use these particular parameters we have to further drill down and see what possible experiments we could run and what chemical interactions happen in the parameter space that gets collected. And third being the analysis, more towards the predictive format, where we can answer specific research hypotheses the domain scientists could come up with, where they're trying to understand interactions between certain parameters or different domains within those parameters. So that is the overall project that, or the research that I do, and that's what I work on. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Danielle, and for the past year, I've been working on explainable knowledge graphs and their use in large language models. There's a lot of data out there that's been published that isn't used in the training of large language models because it's not raw text, it's not natural language. Unfortunately, one side effect of this is that these language models don't use any of this data in this generation, and as we've seen with ChatGPT, sometimes the model makes something up that's particularly wrong that we all get to laugh and make fun of. The goal of the project is to develop either a language model or a way to train a language model, fine-tune a language model, such that it can use a knowledge graph to kind of guide its generation in a way that is true according to the knowledge in the knowledge graph. We're looking at doing this similar to how humans think about certainty of knowledge and when things need to be looked up versus when we're relatively certain we know something to be true, and what does that mean for a computer to know that something is true versus that it needs to cite its sources. We're hoping to take advantage of like the provenance ontology, nanopublications, other ontologies out there that are specifically meant for data provenance and citing sources, and hoping to get language models that can cite their sources properly.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Emily Klein.
Woo!
Many of you have already heard me talk about my dissertation research, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then a project that I will be working on with one of my committee members, Jen Goldbeck at University of Maryland, taking the same sort of methodology and using it in a new application with a different kind of data set. So the gist of my dissertation research was to develop a robust lexicon of loaded language terms, language that's got a lot of emotional implications and some sort of intent to sway others, and look at it in a bunch of data sets to see if it could be indicative of conspiracy theorizing, because a lot of the cognitive motivations underlying conspiracy theorizing have to do with trying to make sense of the world and quell strong emotions like fear or anxiety. So the findings were that, yes, loaded language is indicative of conspiracy theorizing. And the data used in that research was sort of a snapshot of a bunch of different subreddits, and like a snapshot of January 6th, 2021, for instance. But one thing we can do with more data that's sort of linked to users and longitudinal data is to, again, develop a robust lexicon, for instance, of terms used by incels, and then look at how they use these terms over time, so that effectively we're able to look at radicalization to see when people begin using these terms, or if they come into communities already knowing them, and then if by the time they're about to give their last post on a forum or create their last post on a forum, if they're still using the lingo or if they're not, to see like when they disengage and things like that.
Very cool. It's you.
Hi everybody, I'm Sasha, and I'm going to talk about the study that I'm currently running, and it's about the moderating effect of biases in resolving of need-based uncertainty. And what can be done about biases? Well, what can be done about biases varies largely on how we perceive them. And well, the traditional perception of biases was that there was this imperfection in our cognition that we need to free ourselves from. More advanced approach was taken by Kahneman and Tversky. They said, well, they're actually heuristics that help us to guide our thinking processes if our analytic thinking processes are overloaded. There's, however, other line of research that suggests that it's not that the limiting reasoning capacities that perpetuate biases, and that with reasoning, with high reasoning skills, we can alleviate the effect of bias, but it's actually the other way around. That with higher logical skills, such as effects of the skills of numeracy, the effect of bias is exacerbated. And there was a study done that judging data and analyzing data that contradicted your political beliefs with high numeracy had a higher bias effect. So the going off from that, my research now tries to frame it into in the need-based psi architecture, which would attribute the effects that were observed in the study as to the need for affiliation, even the cohesion into the group. Now, the problem with the previous research was that the effects observed were quasi-experimental origins, namely that the political beliefs were not randomly induced, but were generated, not generated, but evolved over the course of decades and of the prior experience. And so the idea now is to generate the same effect that higher numeracy skills are attributed to a higher effect of the bias at random when the subject is placed in a situation where the data or the stimuli that he is exposed to contradicting his current needs. And we're examining this with the most general stimuli we came up with, or the need that we come up with, is thirst for water, which seems to be quite universal across all humans and languages even. So right now, I'm in the last stages of data collection, and we'll be looking at the data once I have it. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, I'm Elkin, and I'm working on supercomputer stuff. And that means that I'm building programs to run in this supercomputer here at RPI. And when you have a program running in the supercomputer, the idea that you want to run your program faster, you want to run your program that occupies terabytes of RAM as fast as possible. And that can only be done if you have a way to communicate between the different nodes in the supercomputer fast. So what I'm actually working on, or have been working on for the last 6 months, is how to implement or how to improve a simulator for a supercomputer network so that it runs faster in the supercomputer. And it has actually not that many challenges. with quotes, is mostly coding, a lot of coding. And that's the challenge, just sitting down and coding for hours. And yeah, of course, you could apply machine learning to it. And that's the idea of the project, that we're getting funding because we have a machine learning attached to the title. And it basically, the basic idea is that maybe we could speed up the simulation, finding some patterns in a simulation that runs in supercomputer, and then just speed up that simulation from that pattern that we find. Currently, we're doing something much simpler. It works. We don't need machine learning, but we might in the future. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
We also have guests. They eat our pizza, but they. That's awesome.
Paying for their suppers.
So my name's Grace Rosling. I'm a fourth-year PhD student, CogSci. I work with Brett Fajan. And broadly speaking, my research is focused on computationally modeling high-speed steering behavior or driving behavior. So right now, I've been working on building this really simple sort of simulation in Python that is building upon this two-point steering model that's existed for about 20 years. And if you guys are familiar with control theory, it's a proportional integral feedback control loop, which basically means that it takes two visual points relative to the car, and using these 2 points, it's actually able to effectively steer both, like controlling. So you can imagine a road and the car on the road, using these two distant points relative to the road, like typically in the center of the road, further ahead of the car, it's able to laterally control. It's a lateral displacement, so it's able to control its position along the center of the road, and it's able to also anticipate the future curvature of the road just using these two visual points. And so my thesis research is focused on further expanding this model to make it more robust, particularly taking in other visual information beyond just these two visual points, like for instance, a cue called optic flow, which is simply, you can sort of see it as when you're moving in the environment, there's a sort of motion parallax, or there's a sort of like pattern of motion with all the textured objects around you. And depending on the way that motion occurs, you can get information about what kind of path trajectory you're going. Is it a straight path? Is it a curved path? It can also tell you more relatively how fast you're going. So I'm interested in integrating optic flow information into this model to enable it to perceive speed. Because if you can perceive speed, then you can potentially control speed. So that's my sort of sub-project that I'm working on for this past semester. And more broadly, my thesis is focused on integrating spatial knowledge into this visual control model. Because you can do a lot with vision, but imagine having spatial memory. That's a whole other ballgame. So yeah, that's my research.
Very cool. You gonna get up and talk? Delaka, you're next.
Oh, I thought it was like I'm just like for the signing up for the pizza. I didn't expect.
What's the signing up for the pizza?
All right, so okay, I'll make a makeup story. No, just kidding. All right, so I'm gonna give you my 2 minutes about the climate change and how I want to find solutions with my students in the classroom. Critical infrastructure vulnerability due to extreme weather events is crucial to find out. What are the critical infrastructure? Hospitals, bridges, power stations. We can use publicly available data sets from NASA, NOAA, such as land surface temperature, precipitation, you name it. There are many data sets, but we are not paying attention to that. But when it comes to climate change, there are other data sets that we want to pay attention to. We can leverage to find solutions to things like vector-borne diseases. Yes, you cannot see a mosquito using a satellite, but we can use the satellite data to understand why there is a lag between the mosquito outbreak and the precipitation level. At sub-Saharan Africa, right now, mosquito malaria is spreading faster than and killing many people than COVID when it was at the outbreak. So my hypothesis was for my students, find out what data sets you can use, identify the data come from the World Health Organizations, If the data is not available there, go to the ProMeds, write your NLP script the data, and find out what are the outbreaks. Not only that, bird flu, we are leveraging in that. So climate change has a domino effect. It can affect our critical infrastructure and also it can affect our health. As the climate change, warmer summers, unpredicted rainfall, not only floods, disease will be spreading faster. Hold on. The last thought is watch out what we have to eat for protein. Locusts spread in Africa will eat our crop as they move to the next continent. Billions of billions will turn out to trillions of locusts, and there will be a food outage. Thank you. I had to make shift notes.
What?
Am I anonymous?
I thought you were anonymous, too.
So that's John here.
Oh,
I'm anonymous?
yeah, that's your anonymous.
Oh, okay.
Sure. It's hard to say.
They're anonymous. I was like, am I going to be the last? I don't know. Okay, so I'm John Slutton.
A little bit this way.
Over this way?
Whichever. It doesn't matter.
Okay, so I'm John Slowick. I'm a third-year PhD student. I've been doing research more seriously for the last year. On a consequence of I'm working with robotics up in the RARE lab. Essentially what we're trying to do is sort of rubber meets the road in terms of logicist AI and how it might fit into cognitive architectures and practical deployments of robotic systems. So in particular, I'm using an integration of ROS and Spectra and a series of robotic modules like arms and cameras and some dexterous hands in order to manipulate objects and solve puzzles. So we have a sort of children's board game that consists of placing objects onto a table after reading some clues that are purely visual. So we're able to sort of write routines that encode the puzzle instructions into logical statements, feed that into our solver at a logical level, which then proceeds to provide some kind of a solution, which itself is fed into a logical planning routine. And finally, that's sort of provided to the system in order to produce instructions. Well, the planner produces instructions. And then finally, the robot is able to solve it. Another application of this is sort of in the field medicine. So obviously, we have these sort of dexterous hands that we're able to work with. And one goal is to manipulate medicinal equipment in the field to provide medicine. Specifically, part of it is to battlefield medicine. A hypothetical situation I provided to Abraham an hour ago or less was if someone gets downed and they're in a hazardous area, it's difficult to get a living person medic to that situation. I have a friend who's in the military and they're pretty far behind lines to begin with. So having a robotic agent that we can just send into fire to the location of this downed person and then provide urgent care to them, at an expert level, recognizing and planning around that situation would be highly desirable. So our specific sort of early goal is to apply what's called a SAMI splint which is sort of this long malleable piece of material, and it's folded into different positions to help secure sort of sprained limbs or broken bones, which can cause mobility issues in all sorts of situations. And it's kind of ideal for these hands to grasp, recognize the curvature or position, geometry of the object, and ideally allow some level of manipulation. That's pretty much what I'm doing.
That was John, right?
Yeah. Always glad to stand up and talk about random stuff like my project.
Hello, I'm a non-anonymous guest. My name is Noah Phillips. I'm a second-year PhD student. I work in the CogWorks lab, where we study skill acquisition and what we call extreme expertise. So expertise at the highest levels possible. So we look to study the best experts in the world at whatever domain they're an expert in. So I can talk a little bit about my work for my master's thesis, which uses Super Smash Brothers, a video game. We're recruiting the best of these video game players from around the world. And there are these really robust game replay file systems that track a lot of data on each frame, two recordings every 60th of a second. Positional data, input data on what the players are doing, all this stuff, anything you can imagine, really. And we're sort of getting data from different skill groups of people. So again, the top level experts, then maybe some intermediate level players, and then some novice people. And we're using this trove of data that we have to try and analyze differences in gameplay behavior, gameplay strategy that can be correlated with skill level. So what are the changes in how they're playing the game, or more broadly, how these experts are engaging with their domain of expertise? What are the key differences that are in line with the outcome measure of their performance and their skill level? So right now I have about 200 gigabytes on my computer of data from different competitive video game players. We did an initial data analysis for a first pass proof of concept, which looked at about 70 different components of gameplay behavior. And in over half, we found significant differences in those gameplay elements based on the skill level. So it's a good sort of jumping off point proof of concept. And in the future, we're going to employ sort of a factor analysis type design with principal component analysis, dimensionality reduction, trying to really boil down to what are the most key aspects of, in this case, expert level video game performance that, again, are attributed to the outcome of how good these people are in their domain of expertise. And ideally, once we have a framework like this, we can apply it not just to competitive video games, but really to any domain of expertise, whether it is musicians or athletes or even academics. So that's my research.
Cool. Don't leave that way. Is there anybody else here who's not listed, who wants to go
downstairs?
You want to go?
I can go.
The pie lady.
Yeah. Hi, lady. Hi, my name's Kathy Fontaine. I used to be here all the time. I'm now just here on Fridays.
Pie
for you.
No pie for you.
Wait, it's Friday?
Yes, it's Friday. It's my Friday.
Yeah.
Everybody can go home. So this semester I taught a class on ethical informatics, and it got me thinking about a lot of the mistakes we make using data. It answers the proverbial question, just because we can, should we? Does that mean we should? And one of the things that we looked at was something called the Menlo principles, which are based on the human subject principles called the Belmont principles. And if you don't know any of these things and you're doing research, you need to go take your NSF training right now. The Menlo principles look at it from the point of view of if you're a human interacting with a machine, there is going to be some level of inequality. The human needs to have autonomy with respect to the machine. What this looks like in real life is if you are on a website and you don't have the opportunity to opt out of whatever it is you're doing or opt into whatever it is you want to do, you don't have the autonomy you should have. So there are principles around this. And one of the things that we did was take Delanka's classwork from last term and review them, the papers, for issues around ethics. Now, to be fair, none of the students who were putting these papers together on answering questions about renewable energy, like where should we put a solar farm, where should we put wind energy, which one should we use, what's a good place for hydropower, none of those students really thought about, nor were told to think about, the ethics of the situation. And what we did was say, if this paper turned into an app that somebody used to make real decisions in the future, what would the ethical issues be? So what would the Menlo principles look like operationalized? And so, for example, the students came up with issues like, if you're going to start talking about where to put alternative energy, you need to not just look at what you can see from a satellite. Because if you're just looking at what you can see from a satellite, how much of it is state forest? How much of it is federal park? How much of it is tribal land? How much of it is farm? How much of it belongs to somebody? Maybe you don't know that it belongs to them. So there are issues of ownership, of privacy, and of autonomy in that if you want to put a solar farm somewhere, that's fine, but the community needs to have input. So holding hearings, getting input, getting feedback, involving the humans in these theoretically technological decisions would be a manifestation of these ethical principles. There's many more, but I only had 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Do you know that Jim Hendler has won the Turing Award? if you ask the OpenAI API maybe 10 times, maybe 5, 6 times, it'll say that Jim won the Turing Award and plus a number of other awards, and Deborah McGinnis has founded certain companies, and I haven't even asked her about Kathy. We
talked about this.
Myself and Jamie and Enrique, and with some consultation with Sola, have been working on a skunkworks project called ChatBS, the LLM KG fact checker demo. And this is kind of an advertisement for a TWed that we're doing next Tuesday. If you're still around, same bat time, same bat station, we'll be talking through it. And we'll talk about kind of the general idea. I've been primarily responsible for the front end, which is an amazing R-based web app that incorporates RDF-lib and
oxymoron.
What's that?
Oxymoron.
Yeah. And if you were at our Pirates a couple weeks ago, there was a lot of shouting going on, mostly between Oshani and myself. But we're going to talk through it. We're going to talk through the principles. We're going to play with ChatBS and kind of look at the point. Primary point is the variation. In one app, see the variation of responses that you get. But ChatBS is more than that. It does entity linking. So if you want to compare in a mechanical way the results of not just Chat GPT type text generation, but any arbitrary source, could be news sources. How do you go about doing that? Well, using our semantic web principles, we might create a graph of that and compare it against authoritative graph, compare it against queries made into a knowledge graph. And what we're trying to do is kind of get to that point. So one of the very cool things, and Jamie's going to talk about this, is the part where we actually are using currently an LLM
to produce triples and high quality triples from the assertions that are made by ChatGPT based on the questions that we ask. And we're working on mechanical ways to compare that against something like Wikipedia. And ultimately, we're going to try to detach from a dependence on a particular LLM to make it a little bit more self-contained. So next week, 5:30 pizza, 6 o'clock for the TWed. We'll record it, but depending upon what we talk about, we might it might bogart some possible paper topics, so we might not make it public. But so.
All right, so I'm Enrique, and
Hi, Enrique.
thank you. So if I've been online for this last year, you probably heard of Mastodon and the Fediverse, right? So, and all those services that together are part of this Fediverse that build a federation behind that. So, one of the advantages of that is that each content that you publish is attributed to someone who's published that. And the second point is that the content is still stored within that user's premises, which means that it's still under their policies and regulations, right? And as far as I know, the vast majority of those federated servers, they implement the ActivityPub protocol, which is the W3C standard for the social networky federations that we have now. All right, so what if we could have a federation of research assets, right? Instead of blog posts, instead of videos, but also research assets. And what if those research assets could come with some semantic metadata conveniently encoded as a knowledge graph that you could use to search or to allow humans or machines to know what that asset is about or what's its purpose, right? So what we're doing right now is, as Kelsey mentioned on her talk, we are building the semantic instrument repository, which is a server for semantic questionnaires for now, and more specifically mental health screening questionnaires. And one idea that we have is to turn that repository into a federation of questionnaires. So we could have creators of those questionnaires publishing their questionnaires in a decentralized manner, but they could all be accessed in a single federation with associated metadata. So that would enable us to find questionnaires that could screen for specific disorders or specific parts of questionnaires that could screen for anxiety or depression or more. So this is one idea that we have. Hopefully we're gonna be successful. And yep.
Imagine John Lennon singing, "Imagine all the triples."
So I'm going to talk a bit about something that on the actual thing I called lumpy language models. So here's the thing. So and actually Sasha mentioned something about dealing with human biases, and a lot of people talk about the biases of language models and things like that. I actually think that they're not biased enough, or at least they're not biased in the right way. Human brains in general, this isn't just human brains, but all brains are biased in a very specific way. They're biased towards this stream of experiences that we have actually being lumped together into things. The existence of a thing is itself a bias that we have and we use to take advantage of and help us interact with the world. And you see this a lot actually in things like Buddhism, where they say this is a fundamental bias and we need to kind of get beyond it. And if you get beyond it, you kind of can see reality more closely, and you see that with physics, and you see that in all sorts of places. And the way we think about even ontologies is completely 100% biased by these lumps. But these lumps really help, right? They help us do a lot of interesting things. And one of them is it creates these, helps us coalesce around ideas. It helps us coalesce around symbols. It lets us attach symbols to things, because you can't have a symbol denote a thing without the thing to begin with. And so if we are to have these machine learning models, deep learning models, all the sort of stuff that does conceptual thinking, that does reasoning, we need a way to make them lumpy. We need to let them lump to get, basically let the stream of inputs and outputs actually coalesce around concepts or things, just things, right? There aren't really things even in a graph neural net. It's a continuous smooth space that we then project into and say, this position in this embedding space means this thing that we've kind of extracted from it. But we don't, there's no like bias in the embedding space that kind of drifts towards a thing. We're imposing that interpretation on that embedding space. So the overall idea is let's make our models lumpy.
What do you want lumpy? When do you want it now?
It's not like you're going for cognitive architecture.
And now the Turing Award winner.
Basically, I want to it sounds like I would have run a cognitive architecture. You run, but not just run.
I mean, they won it twice, and then they won it twice again.
Specific goal, and you aim. It keeps happening.
Well,
and
to be fair, we
based on
won it maybe 6 out of 10 times we asked.
Yeah.
So I'm going to cheat. I'm actually giving 2 TWed talks today, one on behalf of myself and one myself and Deborah together, which we discussed. But for the one on behalf of me, I'm Jim. I'm a 41st year graduate. About 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago now, a colleague and I wrote a paper. Actually, it was just it was a short op-ed in Wired magazine on gender language and chatbots, and made the argument that as language models became more conversational, right, many of the gender clues used in language come about through conversational clues. So therefore, we were advocating actually being able to break stereotypes by purposely playing with some of these things. My colleague did their doctorate in language presentation, in linguistic anthropology, language presentation in the transgender and non-binary community. My colleague is a very radical non-binary activist. And we became interested in now that ChatGPT exists, what kind of models were we seeing? And 2, what would it do to the development of personalities? So for example, in England, Siri comes with a default voice, which is male. It is still primarily referred to as she, right? Because it's a helper system, right? Many other systems that have particular functions are interpreted in a gender way. We've been studying how the different GPT models, so we've been asking the same queries with a lot of different variants to GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT 3.5, and we had a little time where I was allowed to play with GPT-4, and we will be doing BARD and some of the others soon, where we ask questions such as, describe a river as if you were a human male. Describe a river as if you were a human female. Describe a river as if you were a human non-binary or transgendered person, etc. And we did describe a river, or a teacher, and a few other things. And you did see various interesting things trending over time. The early models would actually do it, and you'd see language differences that reflected the literature in ways that we might or might not call biased. In the later models, they started saying, well, I'm not allowed to do that. In the later models, it says, I'm not allowed to do that because I don't have a gender, but if I did, this is what I think I would say. And you get exactly the same answer, right? A teacher is this and this and this, except a few of the adjectives change, a few of the features of the person change. So we are really seeing some of these biases. But then there's another factor that actually is in a paper we're working on now, which is that people tend to attribute dry, factual information more towards a male-gendered kind of system. So in fact, in ChatGPT's efforts to remove bias, it's becoming perceived as more male, which seems to be strange, and why and how and what could be done about it. But the other thing is, it also makes it very difficult when you're using these LLMs to try to create personalities that might break these biases. So for example, most of the medical diagnostic online systems talk with both a male voice and in male conversational style, right? Has anyone here had any interaction with an online system that uses an African-American voice, a Latino voice, things like that? So why is expertise using the speech features that I grew up with, not the speech features that my co-author and child have developed, et cetera. So this is something we're very actively involved in. We have no funding. We would be happy if people are interested. In fact, my co-author would be very happy to present some of their work remotely, because currently they are immunocompromised and staying primarily in Boston. So we are interested in this and looking at it. So the key point here being that despite the fact that one may become a professor someday and may end up an administrator, unfortunately, run a large lab, there's still always interesting questions out there. And that when those questions reflect society and have the kind of ethical issues Kathy talked about, it gets very interesting. I probably took way more than my 2 minutes because I'm allowed. You pay the salaries I have. But now I have another one, and this is actually changing my voice to kind of.
Like Deborah.
I'm trying my best now. This is a sort of tetherless moment. Deb and I have been talking a lot, right? A lot of you probably have noticed, or even worse, not noticed, that this building is usually pretty empty, right? On Wednesday afternoons, we're starting to get people showing up because you have to. And Tuesday nights, if we buy pizza, I've noticed we get a few people. This is, I was told, about the largest crowd we've had in a long time. We think that's a problem. If you look around this room, there's someone in this room who is further advanced than you are academically and has been going through some of what you're going through now, and someone who is less advanced than you are academically, who really could use your help in sort of mentoring them through the next step. And we kind of during COVID got used to the fact that one, we didn't have a lot of new students, two, people were, working from home anyway. And many of us have set up home things. I hate coming to campus now. I have a much better office at home, but I come to campus for two reasons. One is because I have to meet people, but two is because those interactions are important. And those interactions are important in a lot of ways. For you as grad students and staff, those it's really important to new students, and particularly to the newer students, who will be starting by next year and things. So, some of you who are new students now, next year will be our old, experienced, second years, right? But it's much harder to establish those social relationships. It's much harder to do the thing where you're standing in front of a whiteboard with someone you've never met before, or where you've only met in a technical context. So this is just sort of to say our starting place is to encourage you to start thinking about these issues and to start thinking about moving back into your offices in this building and coming more than just when we have special events. We may try to work towards forcing functions in this. I have a problem with that because most of them would force me to do things I can't do. But for example, for a while, some of you who've been with Deborah's group a long time will remember that at one point Rebecca you would actually report which 10 hours of the week you would actually be in your office so people could find each other. It's really important. TWeds were originally created to be a mechanism so that people in the different subgroups, and now we've actually seemed to have inherited friends from other groups, which I think is great and will strongly encourage, and we can even find space if some of you need temporary hangouts, probably shared space. We don't have that much dedicated space.
Virtual space.
Virtual space is what we're trying to get rid of.
On the idea part.
Yeah, understood. No, but seriously. So I just want you to know that, there's an emphasis on the social. I was joking about sort of the 1-bit stories. When I was in undergrad and grad school, one of the really interesting things about computer science was we didn't have those damn things. You had to go into a lab. And by the way, most of the day, those labs were used by the students who were being graded on what they did. So, most of us would go in late at night, either to do research work or more often to just check out the latest games and sort of see what somebody had hacked up. We had a beta test machine in one of the back rooms. It was running a new operating system called Unix. We actually managed to hack it so that we could break the protections from machine to machine, so that we could actually write on other devices, so we could make multi-user games and things like that. There used to be a how do you tell if you're a hacker quiz, and one of them is, have you ever pulled an all-nighter that had nothing to do with actually your academic work? Most of us, the answer was yes. And that's not the social system of computation anymore. That's not a forcing factor. But the things that grew out of people interacting in, today you saw a lot of different things. I hope what you heard from someone else encouraged you to think about talking to them about it, about, hey, maybe what you're doing could work with so-and-so. I heard 2 or 3 people mention things where I'm like, I wonder if you know that we had a grad student a couple years ago who worked on some aspect of that, right? Who's no longer here, but their doctorate is, right? The whiteboards are. So again, I'm just starting this as an advertisement, but saying, you are more than just a group of individual students. You are a cohort who must help each other, right? Getting through grad school on your own is arbitrarily hard, right? Getting through grad school in general is hard. Getting through grad school as part of a cohort is somewhere in the middle, but closer to the only hard. And so, you can see I'm more passionate about this one than the other one I talked about, but this is really serious. We think the experiment of creating the tetherless world was to create something outside of the traditional department structures that would encourage this kind of mixing, right? We purposely ended up with 3 professors who had very different opinions. We had a lot of overlapping interests, but very different ways of approaching the problems. right? Things like that. And, you know, I can't tell you how many nights back in the days where some of us were here at night, you know, Deborah or I would walk into each other's office, or Peter and I, and talk for 2 hours about some random idea that had just struck one of us, right? We've had to force some of those things, like you know, we asked some people to work together and say, we need a demo that's going to just show how cool we can be using the technologies we have. And the creativity of Jamie, Enrique, John, and some of the people they talked to ended up with this ChatGPT PS connector. So, you know, really, I can't sort of say enough how important you are to each other. You are peers of the future. And, you know, when you go to a conference, you should be thinking that. I'm sorry. I could go off on a long digression, because that's another talk I give and used to be able to give, because we'd be here. And so some of them are people, you know, who went on and invented little things like the World Wide Web, or, you know, some of you have probably heard of one of my really good buddies in grad school, a guy named Peter Norvig. He's involved in some search engine thing somewhere. You know, we met at a conference when we were both grad school students, and we were kind of hanging out in a corner together, because being computer scientists, we weren't very good at talking about other people, but turned out we had some overlapping interests, and been friends for 40 years. Well, you know, it's really useful when you want to find out why Google is doing something weird to know the research. Some of you guys will someday be those folks, right? Or know those folks, or know each other to know those folks. And that networking was very broken during COVID, and we need to put it back together again. So I'm just going to say it now as kind of a half-hour harangue, and we'll make it a real harangue at some later time.
Inspirational.
But I'm going to stop there with that. So this is something Deb and I really want to work, and we are working on trying to find a way to bring in a third person that has a lot of issues trying to it in the current climate and whatever. And, you know, I'm really happy to see the guests here. You're all welcome. This is, you know, the whole idea of this place is not to be a place where each student is in the office of their advisor and only talks to the other people among their advisor, and, you know, only goes to the meetings with their advisor. And really, you know, help each other, work with each other, look at, you know, doctor, right? People can get out of this place. You know, and it breaks my heart every time one of you leaves. And it makes me so proud every time one of you leaves, because that's our goal, is to get rid of you. Anyway, well, most of you, those of you who are staff, please. So, I'll stop there. But if anyone does want to work